Hello, everyone. Welcome to Community Bookstore's virtual event series. My name is Noah Mintz. I'm the store's event coordinator. Community Bookstore is celebrating over 50 years in business, and we credit the continued support of readers and writers for this milestone. So thank you all for spending the evening with us. I'm very thrilled today to be partnering once again with our friends at New York Review Books to welcome Celia Paul for the release of her newest book, Letters to Gwen John, in conversation with Jessica Ferri. Now to some housekeeping before I introduce our guests. We've enabled Zoom's auto transcribe setting. So if your version of Zoom is up to date, click on the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen to enable closed captions. If you have any questions for tonight's guests, please click on the Q&A button, which is also at the bottom of your screen. To submit them, we will be asking them at the end of the program, so please don't be shy. There's also a chat box through which I will be posting a link to buy tonight's book if you haven't already. And one caveat for tonight is that we're all at the mercy of our home internet connections, so please bear with any technical issues that might arise. We'll try to resolve them quickly. We have a great lineup of events planned for you, so head over to our website, communitybookstore.net, and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date. One that I want to point out in particular is next Wednesday, May 4th. We're very thrilled to join Source Booksellers, Raven Bookstore, and Books and Books to welcome Will Jawando for his book, My Seven Black Fathers, a young activist's memoir of race, family, and the mentors who made him whole, in conversation with Jelani Cobb. That program is up on our website now and taking registrations. So now, a little about tonight's guests, and we will get started. Celia Paul was born in 1959 and studied at the Slade School of Fine Art. Her work has been exhibited internationally and is in the collections of the British Museum, the National Portrait Gallery in London, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Her major solo exhibitions include Celia Paul, curated by Hilton Als at the Yale Center for British Art in 2018, and the Huntington Museum in San Marino, California in 2019, and Desdemona for Celia by Hilton at Gallery Met in New York in 2015 and 16. Her work was included in the group exhibition All Too Human at Tate Britain in 2018, and she lives and works in London, where she's joining us now. So thank you for staying up with us, Celia. And Jessica Ferry is a writer and photographer based in Northern California. Her work has been published in the Los Angeles Times, the Daily Beast, NPR, Yahoo, The Economist, The New Yorker's Page Turner, Time Out New York, and more. She's the author of Silent Cities, New York, and Silent Cities, San Francisco. She's currently at work on her first novel. So without any further ado, I will hand it off to you. Celia, Jessica, thank you both so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Noah. Really appreciate the introduction. I just want to say thank you so much to the New York Review Books for having me and asking me to do this conversation, and also to the Community Bookstore, of course, for fostering this. And before we began, when Celia and I were first saying hello, I said, I'm really going to have to rein it in and not have a fangirl moment and take deep breaths, because this is such a thrill. It's so rare that you get to speak to an artist that you admire, but also an artist you admire who has written so honestly and frankly about what it is, the experience of being both a woman and an artist, or rather, in both of our cases, being a woman and a mother and an artist. And I loved Celia's first book, Self-Portrait, so much. And I was just bowled over when I heard that she had another one coming out. And I couldn't believe my luck. I just felt like the luckiest person in the world, that there was not only going to be one book, but there were going to be more. And so I just want to jump right in, because we don't have that much time. And I also want to make sure that we have time for audience questions too. So at the beginning of the book, Gwen John actually writes, or Celia quotes from one of Gwen John's letters, in which she says, "It is so difficult to express oneself in words for painters." But apparently not, Celia, apparently not in the case of Celia Paul. And I'm wondering, now that you have your second book has come out, does the writing for you go hand in hand with your painting? How do you make time, or how do they sort of do they work together? Is it sort of a collaboration between the writing of the books and the painting, or are they opposed? Do they vie for your attention, or do you see them sort of as the same work?
Well, I think of myself as a painter, not a writer. And both books that I've written were complete surprises to me. I didn't expect ever to write a book. And when I'd finished Self-Portrait, I didn't expect to write another one. But I think after I finished Self-Portrait, I felt that there was some kind of, I mean, it was open-ended in a good way, but that left me feeling that I wanted to explore more about what it means to be a woman painter. And so to connect more with Gwen John, who I've always felt very intimately connected to. But I think in both cases, I felt I had to write. I felt compelled to say something in both cases. Whereas for me, painting is kind of more of a discipline, a practice that I do try to do every day. Whereas with writing, it's much more that I want to say something specific. And I've got no plans at the moment to write another one. So, but we'll see.
We'll see. We'll see. One of the interesting things that I thought in Self-Portrait, you describe painting as a language of loss, hoping, then despairing, and then hoping again. And you actually describe sort of painting and then taking paint off the canvas, like scraping it off or painting over it or removing the paint and then sort of putting it back on. And I wonder if your experience of writing is sort of the same way. Is it also hoping, then despairing, then hoping again? Or is it something completely altogether different?
It does involve the hope and despair and revision. I think one of the things that I find helpful about writing is that once you've finished the book, you can close the cover and kind of move on. It's a way of dealing with something, with an emotion, with emotions, and then closing the book and moving on. Whereas paintings are kind of open wounds. They never heal. They're there on the, you know, they're open, exposed. And so I think for me, when I've written, it's been to do with needing to deal with something, needing to be able to close the cover and move on.
Wow. So it's more of a final, there's a finality to writing.
There's a finality, exactly.
And painting is different in the sense that what I'm hearing from you is that it's more almost like an exercise, that you're exercising something when you're painting that doesn't necessarily have an end.
No, that's right. It never feels to me as if it has an end. I mean, that's partly why I can't hang paintings, especially my own paintings, up on a wall or anything, because they seem sort of alive. And
so if you had one of your paintings in your studio, you couldn't hang it on the wall because you would want to still take it down and work on it.
That's right. Yeah. Yes, it has I never kind of lose connection to it, and my anxiety about it continues because
Wow.
it's there.
That's so interesting. I think there are probably a few writers, many actually, who feel the same way about their books.
Really, yes.
They're done and they're printed, that they can't even, open them or read them or look at them, because they'd be, just driven to insanity through wanting to go back and change them. So that's really
no, I can imagine, and I think if I did go on writing, I think I would become very obsessed with perfectionism, and there are some things, where I feel I've overused a word or something like that, and I can see how it could drive one insane.
For those in the audience who maybe aren't so familiar with Gwen John, I mean, she is often, like many women artists, defined by the men in her life. But for Celia Paul, who is Gwen John? Who is she to you, and why did you feel this? I know you said that you felt intimately connected with her for a long time, but what is it about Gwen, her life or her work, that drew you to want to write this book?
Well, I think one of the things that I admire most about her work is the intense focus, usually on a small scale, but they're so highly charged with emotion, and yet they're sort of perfectly controlled. And then knowing about her life and her passion and her turbulence, and her kind of, mental instability. She was, and yet she managed to control her emotions and channel her feelings into her work. And I think I was particularly wanting to write about her now because of, in my own life, I was going through a time of turbulence. I wrote it as my husband was dying, and somehow I took inspiration from Gwen's kind of presence of mind when she was, she was deeply unhappily involved with Rodin, and had various love affairs which kind of nearly sent her off course. But she always paintings, and I think that's why I was drawn to her at this particular moment.
Yes. I should let everyone know that the book is a series of actual letters between I almost said letters between you and Gwen, but that's actually the case. I mean, that's actually what it is, because even though Gwen is no longer with us, and hasn't been for a long time, the book is Celia's writing letters to Gwen. Sort of, these are messages of looking for support, looking for advice often, when you are struggling, as you already mentioned, and I'm so sorry for the loss of your husband.
Thank you.
And that what you were going through at that time, and also it was during the pandemic, when everything was shut down and things were so uncertain and chaotic, and still are in many ways. But it's as if the letters are written as if you're reaching out to Gwen in hopes of her being, and I really like what you said about her being this sort of having this presence of mind or being this stabilizing force, which is interesting because, like you said, she did have a somewhat chaotic personal life and had her own struggles. But at the end of the day, she kept painting. She kept
Yes,
working,
yes.
and I think she was painting right up until she died. Is that correct?
I'm not sure. I think she was obsessed with painting and made copious notes about it. But I think in the last 18 months of her life, I'm not sure she did. I'm not a Gwen John expert, though.
She would.
So
She was really sick.
yeah,
Right
yeah,
at the very end.
yes, yes.
Yes, I hesitate to go down this path, but I feel like we have to, because it puts things in perspective, I think, for people who maybe are not familiar with your work or haven't read the book, that, you mentioned her relationship with Rodin, and, you're both sort of under the shadow of this label, which is what it is, of muse, to use a more crude tag, to use an Englishism, a WAG, wives and girlfriends, which is often, women artists who are around other male artists often end up with this tag when really they are artists in their own right. And that has certainly been, Celia, also your story to a large extent. And I know in particular, probably with the first book, with Self-Portrait, I imagine just for convenience that there was some of this, Lucian Freud's muse tells her story, and that sort of label. And I wanted to know about your experience of that, just as Gwen's, historically has been referred to as one of many of Rodin's muses. And she was, a model for him. And in addition to their relationship, she modeled for many of his pieces. Was that frustrating for you when the first book came out to see the book described and yourself labeled in such a way, or was it freeing in a way to sort of then be able to work out of that shadow and of that corner?
I think it has been helpful. And I think I've been surprised actually how deeply people have read it and seen what I was trying to say. I felt that by acknowledging it, I would begin to come out of the shadow. But it's a very, very complicated thing, because I loved Lucian, I still love him, and Gwen loved Rodin. In my own case, I know that Lucian was particularly attracted to young women painters, but he was turned off by female ambition. And so this, to be in love with him was very, very tricky for me, because it meant I felt terribly tangled about my own ambition for my own work. And I think I'm still quite scarred by that as well. And that's part of the reason why I've been trying to work through it by writing about it.
I really can't tell you how much it means to me personally, but I hope that it will mean the same for whoever reads either of your books. To see sort of this, or to read in print, on the page, the struggle and the bristling and the chafing really of what you had to experience and what many women who are also mothers as well, who are also artists, have to experience and what they have to literally struggle against. And oftentimes I feel like it's referred to in an emotional sense, and certainly that is the case. But it's also a physical and literal sense as well. And there is one line in the book that I was really just, I had to pause, because your relationship with Lucien not only affected your personal life and your emotional well-being, but it also affected your ability to do your work, and it also affected your career. And you write, I had to make sure I never promoted my art to the extent that Lucien would feel threatened and would abandon my son and me. I don't think that people quite realize, that when a woman is an artist and makes the demands of the time and the space for that art, that she is challenging an entire system that's predicated on the belief that women are to be objects of sexual desire, and then women are supposed to become mothers and caregivers, and then they are nothing at all. And much of your conversation with Gwen John in this book, and it truly is a conversation. I also want to emphasize that, because in a way, she responds to you, even though, she's dead, but through her letters that you quote and through the anecdotes that you share with the reader about her life that are applicable, it's as if Gwen John were speaking. And that kind of conversation between two women in similar circumstances who are both artists is so rare. One thing that I found that was one of, I think, the most intensely moving parts of the book was when you're writing about the act of mothering, and that the fact that it keeps the artist shackled. And then you write, we are reluctant to lose our status as daughters. We know that in order to be an artist, you need to see the world with the detachment of a child. And I wondered if you could expand upon that concept, the idea of, releasing yourself from the responsibilities of caring for someone else, and then creation of getting back to becoming an artist as being more like yourself as you were as a child.
Mm. Well,
it's such a big question.
It's such a big question, but I think some people are better at doing this than I was. I mean, I personally, when I'm with my son, even now, I want to kind of give everything to him, and I am nothing. And it's something I can't. And I'm sure there are people that don't do that. I'm sure there are people who are much tougher. This is another way where I kind of feel connected to Gwen, in that I know when she was at the Slade, she and Augustus, her brother, lived together, and because she's so sort of thin-skinned, she kind of was so receptive to everything and quite easily influenced, and painted very like him when she was with him. And so she had to kind of forge her own identity and be separate. And I think for me, I've had to be extra ruthless about carving my own space because of my own thin-skinnedness and my kind of inability to be selfish, which I think my son might have found quite reassuring if I was more selfish, actually. But it's something that I have always battled with. This, and I was with Lucian. I was, I think I gave myself up, and I wish I hadn't.
Yeah, these I'm sorry. These are very like emotional, extremely tough things to think about. And I think what is interesting to me is that sort of pressure, that conflict between what you're describing as, you know, giving your son everything, giving your family or whomever it is in your life, and then really having to stake out the time and space and to be selfish, to do, which is what the art requires. That conflict, I think, to many women is not so foreign, but it doesn't make it any easier to talk about.
No, it's extremely complex, actually, and has so much to do with I don't know, to do with desire, I suppose. But I do envy those, you know, the women I write about who I kind of revere, like Emily Bronte and Charlotte and Emily Dickinson and all these women who didn't have children, who didn't feel that they had to take responsibility in the way that a mother does. And it's that kind of taking responsibility for somebody else. It's not only just caring for somebody else and loving somebody else, it's actually taking responsibility that somehow undermines your ability to be a creative artist, which seems to be a particularly female problem.
Yes, I think so. For a long time I struggled with it, and I thought that it was all outside pressure. And I think a lot of it is, you know, in terms of societal expectations about what a mother is, or what a wife is, or partner, or a daughter, or just a woman.
Yes.
And I think, while I think that pressure is still there, I also think that there is something interior that comes from inside as well.
I agree, yes.
Yeah, that I don't think many people talk about, or maybe even realize. And it brings me to my next question with the book, which is that I noticed this thread, this intense thread of, you know, Gwen would describe her need to be alone, her need for solitary time, for space, for peace, for stillness, away from her family, away from her brother, the influence of her brother, away from really everyone. She describes it as, even as a sort of religious desire or even ritual. And it also reminded me of some of the moments in self-portrait when you were writing about your mother, and when she would sit for you as a model. She said that it was a great gift for her because it was a wonderful time for prayer. And so I wanted to ask you about, is the creation of art and painting in that time also a form of prayer? And where is the spiritual? This book just strikes me as, I wouldn't say religious, but a deeply spiritual book, which comes down to sort of these two poles that I think are within any person. It really doesn't even come down to gender, but sort of, this idea of, and you say it at the very beginning of the book, and it's the title of your current show, the two poles of memory and desire for an artist. And yeah, I wanted to ask you about the sort of religious, maybe religious is the wrong word, but ecstatic sort of spirituality of Gwen John, and also the practice of being alone and being alone with your art.
Yes. I think you can sense with Gwen John's paintings, and I think with mine, that we are still in ourselves, and our environment is still, and that we aim for stillness. I think how an artist lives their life makes an impact. I think Agnes Martin, who lived in the desert in New Mexico, the stillness of the desert enters into her work. And it's like ancient Egyptian sculptures that stood in the desert. You can sense that feeling of stillness around. And if you lead a kind of chaotic, loving, domestic life, it's very, very difficult to paint quiet, focused, still paintings. And so I think if stillness is your aim, as it is mine, you have to make sure you create that kind of stillness in yourself. I think I've tried extra hard to create stillness in myself, not only to do with being a mother, but living in central London as I do. As it's very late at night here, there's not so much traffic, but you may hear the occasional kind of fire engine going by even now. But I've very much practiced a kind of inner stillness, and it's very, very important to me. And before I start a painting, I need to kind of still myself. And the act of painting is like a prayer. And for me, that's quite different to writing. But I'm not sure if I were, maybe for some writers it is like praying, but for me, painting, it's the act of painting is like prayer. It comes, I kind of lose myself, and also the whole whole thing of it is quite like prayer, to do with kind of loss of self is the way to find yourself. And to approach something with humility, but confidence as well. And those two things, yes.
Yes, because I think the kind of stillness that you write about in this book, and that Gwen also writes about, is only possible through knowing oneself, and through knowing and having that confidence of the idea that your work is worth it, if only because it's worth it to you.
Yes, yes.
There's one quote in the book where I think you say, in order for an artist to create art, or I can't remember the exact quote, but she has to love herself.
Yes, yes. You have to have self. I mean, I think it was something like self-knowledge leads to self-acceptance. And I've battled a lot with self-hatred and low morale, and my self-portraits that I've done when I've been in that state are just no good. They're strained and full of false feeling. You have to, I mean, you know, false vanity is also is just as bad, but to accept yourself as you are is an aim. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's particularly difficult for women artists and women painters as well. I mean, you mentioned a self-portrait. It's difficult to have that confidence to really paint oneself as with truth. When we live in a society that would rather not see that truth, or deems it not worthy of our gaze. And one painter that you mentioned in the book is Alice Neal, and the self-portrait that she has of herself as an older woman, which is what she was, painting herself. And she's actually, I think if it's the painting that you're talking about in the book, is the one where she's seated at an easel.
Yes, that's right. Yes,
and she's nude. She's nude.
Yeah, it's the most uplifting painting.
It is the best, like one of the most amazing paintings ever.
Yes,
she's just looking in the mirror and painting herself on the easel.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's no kind of feeling like, oh, aren't I an ugly old woman? Or I mean, she just, I don't know. I read that she said kind of, I love it, and and something like, I mean, there's no sort of embarrassment or romanticism or anything. It's just as she is, and it is so life affirming. And I would love to be able to do something like that, because although it's sort of dispassionate, it's extremely emotional as well. So yeah.
Oh yes. I mean, I think it's extremely powerful in sort of her casualness. Like you said, she appears exactly how she is, but it is also confrontational in its casualness. I mean, I think your self-portraits are equally as powerful.
Well, thank you.
Yes, I think that they are extremely confronting, and I don't mean that, I mean that as a compliment. I don't really know what to say about your self-portraits, except that I do think that they are extremely honest.
I think I'm
Yes.
getting there. I did, in fact, the last, I think it's the last image in the book, the Gwen John book, is a painting, a self-portrait I did just days after my husband died.
Yeah.
And I felt I had to paint myself just to record the truth of myself at that point. And I think all the kind of emotion shows in my neck, because I think I store a lot of feeling in my neck, and it's quite extraordinary how, because I try and paint a self-portrait every month, and I title the self-portrait after the month they're painted in. Not only the quality of the light of the season enters into the portrait, but actually what is happening in my life somehow makes its way into the paint, and I'm not quite sure how that happens, but it's a way of kind of getting to know where I am in my life to paint myself, because it reveals things to me that I hadn't been aware of.
Wow. So at the beginning, the very first, your first answers to my question was that you wanted to, in writing the book, you felt that you had to write the book. You felt that you had something to say. You had to say it. You could not be quiet. And I'm wondering, how does it feel now to have these two books, to have done that writing and to have it out there and on the paper? And how does that feel? Is it relieving? And also, how do those emotions affect your painting?
I'm actually very sort of, I love this book that I've done. I mean, it's partly, it's got, I'm surprised by how kind of both, it's quite a thick book, but it's also quite intimate as well, so that I feel like I've actually done something, and I think I'm pleased with the selection of images, and I love it as a sort of object. I'm quite squeamish about dipping into reading it. I think that, but as an object itself, I'm tremendously pleased. I just wish my mother had been alive to see these two books. She would have been so pleased. But I think I felt I had to write the books because because after Lucian died in 2011, as I've said, I think in other places, that I was quite shocked by how I was represented in the press, just as his muse and not as a painter. And I hadn't realised how I was seen, and I thought I would, I thought that just by keeping my head down and carrying on painting, that that was all I needed to do. But in fact, I think if you need to change things, you actually do need to write about them. I think painting is such a kind of mysterious, oblique art, that if you actually need to make something different, you have to write about it. And so I'm pleased that I have, because I think it has made a change, not only to how I'm seen publicly, but to my own feeling of self-worth and confidence. I feel I've dealt with something. And I'm quite excited about what will happen next, because I'm approaching the age that Gwen John was when she died. She was 63 when she died, and I'm now 62. And she became more and more reclusive in her in her last years. And she became a complete recluse at the end. And I've been wondering, should I do the same? Should I become a recluse? Should I completely isolate myself? And I'm still undecided. But because I've been, I don't know, extremely isolated all through this pandemic time, in a way that I've never, ever in my life been before, even though I've always chosen solitude, it has been a choice, whereas this was a kind of imposition. And I've suddenly thought, well, actually, maybe I do want to start connecting to people again and painting people.
Well, I think even if you do become a recluse, I think that these books, I mean, your painting, of course, but also the books, it's like you said, you know, putting it into language, and if you want to change something, these are a way of connecting with people. Even if, you know, the intent as a writer is to work something out for yourself, or to say something that you felt that needed to be rectified in your own life. The wonderful thing about writing is that then it can also resonate with your readers. And
that's a beautiful thing to say. Yeah,
definitely done that with both books. Okay, we have some questions from the audience. This one says, this is from Natalie. She says, "Thank you, Celia, for sharing your paintings and words. I'm a mother and painter, and I teach young children. I too want time, but feel like I have so little of it. Are there ways in which your mothering has been generative for your painting?"
I think it has. I think this, for example, with Gwen John's paintings, they're extremely aesthetically beautiful. They're some of the most beautiful paintings. But I think there are richnesses from being a mother that don't enter into Gwen's work. And I think there's a kind of compassion and humour which can be gained from being a mother as well, which feeds into the work and actually, yes, makes it rich and compassionate.
Wow, that's a great answer. Yeah, yes. Okay, we have time for one more question. This will be our last question from the audience. Celia speaks about her paintings not being able to hang them on her wall because she'd want to keep working on them. They are still alive. So how does she ever know how a painting is done? Or at least that she is able to stop working on it? Or how does she determine a painting is done enough to let them out the door?
Well, there have been paintings that I wished I hadn't let go, because they kind of, I've wanted to get them back and rework them. But there's a kind of feeling like, just a feeling, it's done. It's a sort of simple feeling of just not being able to think what else I can add to it. And that's a really very nice feeling to have. It's but I think if they were probably hanging on the wall, I might kind of say, well, is it?
I think I saw somewhere that you had to you turn them around so that they.
That's right. I turn them with their stretcher side out,
right,
so that
so that you aren't tempted.
Yeah. Mm.
Well, I think that we have run out of time, but I just want to say thank you so much to Celia for speaking with,
thank
us
you
today.
so much, Jessica. I think you've been, thank you.
Thank you. It's so nice, lovely to meet you. And yes, everyone, please buy Celia's books and read them. You are in for a treat. They're both such beautifully written, gorgeously rendered. And yes, they do contain beautiful art in them as well. And they're available from community bookstores. So support support Celia, support your local bookstore. And thank you so much, Celia. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Noah. Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you both so much. This was a really wonderful conversation. I could listen all night, but I know it's getting very late in London, so we should let you get off to bed. But yes, thanks so much. Jessica, you've done my job for me. Please consider purchasing a copy of Letters to Gwen John from Community Bookstore. We hope to see you at another virtual event very soon. Thank you for joining us and have a great evening.